Oi, oi, it's your boy, the Tom Cruise of limited fight news, Jack Slag. Very slow week, not an awful lot going on. If you're here for UFC content, I don't know what to tell you. There's nothing happened. We're going to be talking about just some of the fights that did happen this weekend, mainly a couple from Rise, which is a kickboxing organisation, and of course, Beterbiev versus Anthony Yard. Then I'll do a question and we'll get out of here for this week. All the UFC Bellator stuff is happening on the Boycast this week, so go get that. If you're not a boy, bruh, what are you even doing? That's where all the good stuff happens. Actually, I said there's no news. There was a Dana White special announcement, which has historically always been great. If you're new to the sport, you won't... if you're new to the sport, you probably won't remember years ago when he promised a special announcement for a couple of weeks in advance. And then it turned out that people were like, is it going to be Chuck Liddell versus Wanderlei Silva? Are we getting the Pride champion in to fight the UFC champion? And it turned out to be an announcement of action figures. But then there was the Go Big concert, the Time Is Now press conference, where they got every single UFC champion on stage. They told the media that there was going to be a huge announcement coming. Dana White came out and immediately opened the floor to questions. And the first question was sort of like awkwardly, what's the big announcement? And he went, we didn't get it done in time. They had the Time Is Now trending on Twitter. So classic Dana White special announcement, not too special, but they announced some fights. Formalized John Jones versus Cyril Gane. That should be fun. Shevchenko versus Grasso, which is ridiculous because Shevchenko's this fight was basically announced online the week after they announced that Tyler Santos is going to be fighting, was it Erin Blanchfield? And then Shevchenko popped her head above the parapet and was like, all these people say they're ready to fight me, but no one wants to. Like, Tyler Santos has asked several times for the rematch. They're doing Jeff Neal versus Shavkat, Gaethje versus Fiziev. That's the one that people have been wanting for a long time. Pereira versus Adesanya they're doing again, which is 2 in MMA and 4 in combat sports generally. The big one that everyone was talking about was they announced Gilbert Burns versus Jorge Masvidal, who, he's been sitting on the sidelines doing nothing for a very long time. I could see that being a fight that Masvidal can win because he's got very good takedown defense and lovely body kicks and good stand-up. And Burns hasn't historically been a takedown machine, but Masvidal has also sat on the sidelines for years, and also his last few wins have been over people who aren't particularly notable. Darren Till, Ben Askren, and Nate Diaz are not the level of welterweight that we're talking about here. They're doing Yair Rodriguez versus Rosas, which should be good. Rob Font versus Adrian Yanez. I love that fight, and there's a few others there, but those are the key ones. I suppose the interesting part is that they sort of had Alex Pereira ready to go and fight Jamal Hill, and he could have become a double champ without defending a takedown from a serious takedown artist at any point. But it sounds like they want to do the Izzy thing again. I presume that one did fairly good numbers, and they decided, yeah. I mean, also Adesanya was a long-reigning champion. Historically, even though it isn't the rule, they do tend to like to give long-reigning champions rematches. Especially because they also tend to be on good contracts. So if you're paying them that much money, you might as well get half of a title fight out of it. Then there was all the teasing that Tony Ferguson was going to be doing The Ultimate Fighter opposite Conor McGregor. And Conor McGregor barely turned up for the series of The Ultimate Fighter that he was on. So I don't know what they were trying to do there. But then people coming out of the woodwork to call out Tony Ferguson, which is such a bad look now. Still see people saying, like, he turned back the clock and won that one round against Michael Chandler. No, he threw a punch and Michael Chandler happened to be kicking at the same time. And then Michael Chandler was on wobbly legs for most of the round. It wasn't him turning back the clock and doing an amazing showing. It was Diego Sanchez dropping Gilbert Melendez. And then the most hilarious piece of MMA news was that Khamzat Chimaev is taking a load of Ramzan Kadyrov's in-house fighters to Tiger Muay Thai, and then there was a great piece of footage of Khamzat letting Kadyrov manhandle him, which was so lame. Because if you train with anyone really elite, they can make you work, and work their bad positions and things like that. But he's just laying on the floor going, oh no, I'm helpless, while Ramzan Kadyrov's front headlocking him, throwing him to his back, sitting on him, Very, very lame. And I said on Twitter, but I think it bears repeating, imagine Leon Edwards letting Rishi Sunak do that to him. Rishi Sunak, who is like 5'1", the Chancellor has to come out and lift up, when he was Chancellor, you have to come out and lift up this red briefcase at arm's length in front of you. And it's a fairly standard photo thing you do before the budget goes out. And he's the only person I've seen like arched back, struggling under the weight of this suitcase. Briefcase, sorry. It's a red briefcase, not a red suitcase. But what went on this weekend, I think probably the biggest thing for most people was Artur Beterbiev versus Anthony Yarde. We talked about this a bit on the Boycast. I previewed it. And it was a really interesting fight. And I think Yarde did a lot better than a lot of people expected. I didn't expect him to do quite as well offensively, or finding his moments in this one. He found quite a few good moments. Beterbiev's a weird one because people treat him with the sort of like immortality, the aura that you give like a prime Gennady Golovkin or someone like that. And he's not really, he's quite hittable. He's been dropped a couple of times in his fights, but he's also just generally quite hittable. I mean, he's tough as nails, so that more than makes up for it. But he's also quite an interesting fighter because he is very lopsided in his hitting. Most fighters have a better hand, a better Biev, if you will, and give myself one for that. But he's so right-hand heavy, and it's quite interesting because that is what everyone... Well, when I say everyone, I'm going to talk generally about right-handed people who make up something like 85% of the population. Right-handed people generally hit better with their right hand. They learn to stand with the left leg forward. I mean, the reason that the stance is the way it is to put your power hand at the back to really mean that you can swing and hit with it hard. And we've talked, over the years many, many times about people putting their strong hand in front. So you're seeing certainly nowadays you're seeing more right-handed southpaws. But for a very long time in boxing, coaches would discourage you from fighting southpaw because it was weird and people wouldn't fight you. And also people expected boring fights out of you because the southpaw orthodox dynamic just wasn't as... It made people very cautious. And, it took until like Lou Tendler was the first really successful southpaw. But even then, there weren't many, even up until like the 70s. Made it hard to get fights, made it hard to win fans and so on. But what they would do is they'd change a a left-handed fighter to orthodox, and then they'd have all kinds of advantages on the tradition, on the harder punches to master traditionally for an orthodox fighter, the jab and the left hook. So a lot of the time when you see a really good technical boxer puncher, power puncher, they've spent a lot of time investing in mastering the left-handed punches. Left hook, powerful jab, so on. It's quite rare to see someone who is basically as good off both sides of the plate. Someone like Gennady Golovkin, I feel like he could break one of his hands and he'll probably be able to put you away with the other one. With Beterbiev, I feel like if he broke his right hand, he'd have a very hard time finishing a fight with just his left. He'd have to be a lot better than the other guy because his left hand is... Sometimes it becomes even an afterthought, but... he's so reliant on that right hand. And it is the easier punch to see coming. It is the harder punch to land a lot of the time. But one of the ways that he makes up for that is that beautiful wide right to the body. We'll take this fight from the top. So what happened was that as they came out, Anthony Yarde was looking for a counter left hook as he brought Beterbiev forward. So he was going back to the ropes, and then he'd swat him with a left hook as Beterbiev stepped in to punch. And he caught him a couple of times with this in the early going, and then there was one in round 5 where he basically did the Ricky Hatton. Like he slapped him as Beterbiev was coming in, and Beterbiev, his head went between the ropes in the corner. So he was landing this left hook quite nicely. It wasn't... When we talk about punching purity a lot, it's... I always like to make sure that people know that you can knock someone out with a slap. I mean, we've got power slap nowadays, but you can knock someone out with a partial punch if you catch them right. Particularly the bigger you are, and these are big lads we're talking about now. They're both light heavyweights, but this slapping left hook wasn't a super weighted punch, didn't have his whole body weight behind it, but he was really annoying Beterbiev with it. However, it meant that Yarde was always going backwards towards the ropes, and this is something that you saw play out quite a lot in the fight. He kept putting himself against the ropes, and Beterbiev would come in and smash away with combinations on him. Sometimes getting check hooked on the way in, but often just landing good punches. The wide right to the body I was raving about last week, but you saw it on full display here. I think there's this obsession with the left hook and the liver. You know, you hit the liver with the left hook and guys really feel it. And then people seem to undervalue the role of the right hand to the body. Beterbiev, sometimes he gets nice and close and he opens his elbow up and he hits the kidney, which is an illegal punching area in boxing, but it still hurts a lot and is hard to see for the ref. But oftentimes that wide right works beautifully as a counter, because as the opponent opens up their elbow, you can hit them in the ribs for free, or in or under the floating rib. And even if that doesn't hit the liver, you're going to disrupt the guy's breathing and you're going to make him pull his hands back. So the wide right, it's counterintuitive, because you feel very open throwing it, but you can make the guy pull back rather than trying to capitalize on you being open. And the example I gave last week was Sugar Ray Robinson, who did tons of right hooking to the body, and then he'd throw combinations off it, and you're watching it going, but his chin's wide open. But every time you see it, you realize that the other guy is closing his elbows up and covering as soon as Robinson's digging in that right hook to the body. And you can always roll down behind your shoulder and walk off in the other direction too. It's a punch that's slow to follow up on, but because it disrupts people's breathing if they're extending out of their stance and their elbows away from their body, it's I think in terms of the punches, the traditional punches in boxing, it's one that really does hit above its weight. It's very undervalued by a lot of fighters. And what you saw in this fight was that Beterbiev was able to use his right hand to the body really well as a counter, because Yard was so often reaching for him with the jab or with the slapping left hook, or even just reaching out for his shoulders to push off him. But then that links in with something else that was costing Yard, which was forgetting that boxing is, it extends beyond the punches, the physical contest. And this is something that's really common in a lot of boxers. And you'll see some guys really make a name for themselves or are able to just make the difference in fights by working in the grey areas. Clinching is technically illegal in boxing, but people use it all the time anyway. Holding and hitting, technically illegal, but people use it all the time anyway. But physically controlling someone with your hands is a big part of boxing, and people don't seem to... A lot of guys get to a really good level without even being taught it seems. If you watch Beterbiev in a lot of his fights, he's very good at stopping people from tying him up. He hurts a lot of people, and then when they move into clinch, his hands are on their collarbones, his hands are on their biceps, his elbows are in front of their collarbones, and he's holding a collar tie. It's basic wrestling stuff, but he's keeping guys from clinching him, which is half the battle in finishing a good opponent. And then the other way round, Yard would get him on the back foot and push him to the ropes, and then Yard would come in swinging and lean on him a little bit, and Beterbiev wouldn't accept the clinch, he'd just turn him around. There were about 5 occasions in this fight where big moments happen for Yard. He chases Beterbiev back to the ropes. Did I say fence a minute ago? Sorry, I'm used to talking about MMA. Chases him back to the ropes, and Beterbiev just pushes it, Beterbiev waits for him to lean on him, and then just pushes him round into the corner. It reminded me a lot of... I'm always reminded of Roberto Duran, but he was a guy who, firstly, was great at working in these grey areas. If you watch, there was some footage of him talking to someone the other day. It might have been someone like Bivol. He was talking to a young boxer, and he was showing him on the heavy bag, and he was saying, I used to hold behind the wrists of my opponent and put my head on them because I could feel when they were going to punch, and then I'd put my thumb in their bicep and stuff. Obviously, your thumb used to be untaped from your glove. You can't really do that as easily now. But you can still use a bicep tie with your whole hand. And he was just showing how he used to use those infighting techniques from a position where guys had hands on each other. But his fight with Davey Moore is a great example where he'd get Moore to the ropes, Moore would clinch him, and then as the referee came in to separate them, Duran would just push into the referee, like the ref's hand would be in his chest, and the ref would stop pushing Duran and just push Davey Moore back more into the ropes. And then Duran, he'd step out of the way and Duran just have him back on the ropes already and start battering him. Physically moving someone around until the ref threatens to take a point from you for doing it, which I haven't seen in years and years. I'm talking about guys just diving for clinches constantly because they're terrified of getting hurt. But so rare to see a point taken for moving a guy around. And it results in big moments in fights. If you go from your back is on the ropes to having the other guy cornered, you've done a big move, but it's not a move that anyone recognizes as a punch. It doesn't go on the stats. It's not going to be replayed in the highlight reels. But it happened about 5 times in this fight. Beterbiev just spun him around, put him in the corner with his hands, like a steering wheel. And the thing that cost Anthony Yarde the most was getting fixated on this uppercut, the right uppercut. And it didn't help that he used it a couple of times to good success. He had Beterbiev coming in on him along the ropes, and he hit him with a big uppercut in the first or second round. And then he slipped a jab and threw an uppercut back later. And then he started doing that a lot. And he was throwing these big, wide uppercuts. You know, there's 2 ways to throw an uppercut. You loop it at your shoulder, so you throw a big, wide punch, which leaves you very open for quite a long time. Or you dip down and you come up with it, and you try and keep it all very tight, which not a lot of people do. Think of Mike Tyson's best uppercuts. Yarde was doing his slip and then letting the hand drop all the way down and coming up. And I thought it was a great bit of work from Beterbiev to realise what he was doing, because I think it was the 8th round, the stoppage happened. In the 8th round, Beterbiev starts jabbing him, and Beterbiev doesn't do an awful lot of jabbing. He's got a serviceable jab. I was watching an interview with a British boxer who'd been working with him, and he said, like, Beterbiev is kept telling him, like, I'm trying to be a better technical boxer. I'm not very good, but I'll get there. And the British boxer was saying, like, no, you're already very good. But he starts using his jab a lot more in round 8, and he starts poking Yarde with it. And as the commentators are saying, oh, Beterbiev's going to his jab lots this round. Beterbiev shoulder fakes and throws the right straight immediately after. A real short shoulder fake, right straight. Very basic setup that you'll see a lot. Something that Roberto Duran used to talk about a lot, actually. But Yarde slips what he thinks the jab is. You know, he slips the shoulder fake, starts loading up this big uppercut, and eats the right hand as he's throwing it. It's a beautiful little setup that Beterbiev got him with. And then that was basically all she wrote. He got knocked to the mat, got up. His cornerman was already up on the apron when he got knocked down the second time. So I think his cornerman was ready to stop it, because you're not allowed to be up on the apron between rounds, and they're supposed to stop the fight if that happens. The very famous example of it not happening was when Zab Judah just loaded up and punched Floyd Mayweather in the crotch, and everything went mental. There were people jumping on the apron. Zab Judah got like choked unconscious over the top rope, and no one realised. But they didn't punish anyone for that, because obviously there's so much money in this, and you don't want to pick one guy when both corners were up on the apron to disqualify. And then the other one that I really liked from Beterbiev earlier in the fight was he used a slipping left hook, which is a punch you very seldom see. So think of the dipping jab. When the opponent throws his jab, you dip to your right so that his jab goes over your shoulder and you're on the elbow side of his jab, and you throw your jab at the same time. That's a dipping jab. But if you loop your hand a little bit, you can swing it around and throw a left hook. And it won't have too much power on it typically. But there have been a couple of guys who are really good at it. Barney Ross, when I was watching footage of Barney Ross for the history episode, which is on the Patreon. Bruh. Another plug. He used to hit the slipping left hook all the time. And it's such a jarring punch. It doesn't have a lot of distance to cover. It doesn't have a lot of stank on it. You can't plow through the guy's head like you can on a dipping jab. But it really does throw people off. And Beterbiev, I put a clip of Beterbiev doing it on the Twitter. Go have a look at my Twitter. What did I tweet? Leaving this dipping left hook here for you to find later, because I'm talking about it on the podcast right now. There we go. Beterbiev throws his head to the right as Yarde's reaching for him, slips the jab, whips around the left hook, catches Yarde on the point of the chin. And the bit that I left out of the clip was that Yarde immediately, he was close enough to jab Yarde back out to range. So he stepped in with the left hook and then jabbed him out. It was really nice. Slipping left hooks you do not see a lot of. There was one really good one that Naz did that blew my mind, and he never showed it again because that wasn't his style. But Barney Ross is a great example of someone who used to do it a lot. And it's a weird thing because a lot of traditional left hookers don't really do it because they tend to try and get themselves into the best position to left hook and then left hook. The dipping left hook is really more of it's a bit of a shitty punch compared to like a proper left hook, but it really does throw people off if you land it. But you're going the opposite direction to loading up a left hook. So a lot of guys like the Joe Frazier's and Tommy Morrison's and people of the world never really did it. But it was a good fight. It was more competitive than a lot of people thought it would be. And I think it was the 7th round was a really great round. Yeah, well worth watching. There wasn't a lot going on this weekend, but you can find that on YouTube for free. You can even watch the highlights on YouTube for free, which give you the main gist of everything anyway. And then for the more involved Weeb boxing fan, there was a Rise event on this weekend, or last weekend. Rise 164. Couple of notable fights on it. Again, I'm just getting back into, or starting to get into Weeb boxing. I'd never been into Weeb boxing, but you had your under 60 kilogram title fight between Chanyong Lee and Huma Hitachi. Hitachi was very well rated, but smaller. Chanyong Lee is, well, I said on the boycast, but he's just tough as nails. He's got terrible defense, just walks people down, but he's got these enormous thighs. He's kind of like Benson Henderson, just a normal size or a small person with gigantic hams on his legs. And he hides them under these big shorts. When he weighs in, you're like, what? But he just walks people down, takes punches on his face, and lands good low kicks. And Huma Hitachi actually has a really good left hook for kickboxing. One of the reasons I've really been enjoying getting into this sort of J-kick thing is that Japanese kickboxing has undergone a real resurgence in recent years, and there seems to be a lot of guys who are focusing more on boxing within a kickboxing context. So the match, which was the big one that happened last year between Tenshin and Takeru, Tenshin Nasukawa, I mean, he's getting ready to go boxing anyway, but showed one of the best jabs I've ever seen in kickboxing just in that fight, and it completely bamboozled Takeru. But you get a real mix because you get guys who just want to stand on the outside and kick. You've got guys who want to throw flurries on the inside. You've got guys who want to use the jab. You've got guys who want to counterpunch, guys who want to knee. The sheer variety in a lot of these shows is always really impressive. So Hitachi's a really good puncher, but also terrible defense. Takes a lot of punches and then lands that one awesome quick left hook. And I thought, Chanyong Lee is going to get his head turned around at some point here. And he did in the first round several times, get his head turned around. And in the second round. And then in the third, fourth, fifth, he starts pouring it on. Hitachi's really struggling to keep up. They managed to score it a draw, so they even got an extension round. But imagine doing 6 rounds. Crazy. Especially for a guy in Hitachi who wasn't a big cardio guy anyway. So the real standout from this weekend for kickboxing was Chanyong Lee's incredible endurance and durability. And in the co-main event, the number one, I believe, strawweight in the world, Kazuki Osaki, he put on a great performance against a Thai that I hadn't heard of called Mangkon. Lots of standing in the pocket and trading uppercuts and body shots. Brilliant counter left hook, lovely low kicks. Starting with a counter left hook, I think, in the second round. But yeah, it was a good fight. Go look that one up because it's very quick, and I'm sure they put it on their YouTube now. But it was quite funny because I said going into this fight, Kazuki Osaki has the kind of record where I don't want to research him because he's just all split decisions and majority decisions in his last 5. And then he comes out and just starches this dude. But I reckon that'll do us for today. We've got tons to talk about on Wednesday, Thursday for the boycast. A hilariously bad UFC event with 3 heavyweight fights and 1 light heavyweight fight. Jesus H. Christ. So either a lot of finishes or a lot of laughs. And that's going up against... it's also on at 1 a.m. American time, which is hilarious. And that's going up against... Well, not really going up against because it will be starting after it's over. But Bellator is putting on Fedor versus Bador 3. How many times am I going to do this fucking Fedor career retrospective? I suppose I've got to find a new thing to do on it. But they've got a load of other great fights on that. Lorenz Larkin, Neyman Gracie, Johnny Eblen, fresh off kicking the shit out of Gegard Mousasi. He's fighting Anatoly Tokov, who I believe is a Fedor boy. Carl Albrechtsen, who has a win over both Nemkov brothers and a loss to Jiri back in the day. In a really good fight, actually. So yeah, not short of things to talk about this weekend. If you want to send an email to the podcast, and I'll answer them on the next one, jackslackpodcast@gmail.com. If you want to see what I'm writing anytime, fightprimer.com. And if you want to get in on the boycast and the extra articles and things that I do, sign up to the Patreon. I am your boy, Jack Slack. Slightly busier week incoming, bless.